right, everybody, welcome back to In Progress. This is our weekly roundtable discussion of the political stories, issues, and ideas that are top of mind for progressive folks all across the Lone Star State this week. My name is Chris Mosier. I am the Communications Director here at Progress, Texas. Welcome if you're hearing us on KPFT FM 90.1 Houston, Texas. Progress, Texas amplifies progressive leaders, values, and actions. And we operate a major digital network, including social media, podcast, contributions to legacy media, and more. We reach millions of people all across Texas all the time. In Progress is also heard every Sunday here on KPFT HD2 at 11 a.m. And this week we are joined by Executive Director Kathleen Thompson. Hi, Kathleen.
Hey, listeners. Welcome.
We have Advocacy and Development Coordinator Tatum Owens.
That's me. Hi, y'all. Good to see you.
Tatum on the screen is wearing a really cool top that has you said it had a name. What is that? What is that called?
It's a caftan?
A caftan? I don't. Okay, I don't know that.
It's just a flowy kind of dress. Basically just a sheath that you just like.
Oh, that's cool.
And this is a butterfly pattern on it for those listening. So thank you, Auntie Vaughn, my hippie aunt who gave it to me.
Well, it is a beautifully hippie sort of thing to be wearing. I really like it.
Sure is.
And in her standard black t-shirt is our digital associate, Haley Smith. Hi.
Howdy. It's not black, actually. It's navy.
It's navy. Get my eyes checked. Anyway, y'all, so we have a couple of different stories to kick around, two stories in particular to kick around, one of them particular to Houston, and the recent rescinding or revising, shall we say, gutting, I would say, of the policy that was just put in place by the Houston City Council to limit the degree to which Houston police officers are allowed to interact with ICE. So we'll talk about that. We will also talk about this recent Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals decision that has given the go-ahead for Texas to be able to force our public schools to display the 10 Commandments in our Texas schools. You might think these are two completely separate stories, but in fact, they are both prime examples of the way that the current powers that be are chipping away at the U.S. Constitution with, of course, goals to continue that slippery slope towards, remaking that Constitution into something that would be more favorable to their worldview and, at the peril of the rest of us. But let's go ahead and start with Tatum here. The story in Houston, people listening on the radio in Houston very likely know about all of this, and it's kind of been late breaking stuff that we really just started talking about on Thursday morning. The attack by Governor Abbott on this ICE policy that was in place in Houston to essentially preserve the Fourth Amendment, more or less, is what it was about. Mayor John Whitmire has led a charge at the governor's behest to make a big change to that ordinance. Tatum, what's happened as of last night at City Council?
Yeah, and Fourth Amendment, of course, is unreasonable searches and seizures. This seems like a pretty clear example of a violation of that, but Greg Abbott is demanding with state funding that the city of Houston actually do enforce a policy in which Houston Police Department, or HPD, has to let their police officers basically call in ICE at any time that they need, because a civil warrant that ICE basically has on their own, which is at a lower level of authority than HPD has, does not suffice. And so Greg Abbott is basically saying, I'm going to withhold funding to the city of Houston and also to the Houston Police Department. He's defunding the police. That's been the tagline on this story.
Defunding the police. Let's say that very clearly.
Very strange to hear that coming down from Greg Abbott, but he is, or he was, until Houston City Council basically reversed this ordinance. So it's been a whirlwind. There's been a lot. We've actually talked about it on In Progress. You can check out Chris's coverage on the Daily Dispatch, because it's been back and forth between the city council, John Whitmire on that city council as the mayor, and then Greg Abbott. So you have three pieces to this puzzle that have basically ended in this result of more power for ICE in the city of Houston.
How much of a spine does Greg Abbott have? Is he really going to stick to his guns and not giving the city of Houston hundreds of millions of dollars for this?
You would have thought that he might possibly cave, but that would have required some degree of opposition from Mayor John Whitmire. So we talked about, what was the quote from last time that we talked about, John Whitmire's quote?
The only opinion, I don't even have this in front of me, but it's seared into my brain. The only opinion that matters is the governor's.
Right.
I heard that and I thought, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You're elected to represent how many Texans, and not even your opinion matters?
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't work for Governor Greg Abbott. I thought he worked for the people who elected him, the people who didn't vote for him, and the people who didn't even vote. He's supposed to represent all Houstonians.
Right. Absolutely. And you know, and their rights and their quality of life. We have to remember that all of this ultimately, well, it's about the Constitution, which we'll get to, but more tangibly and more day to day, it's about being able to feel like you can call the police if you need to, or not being afraid if you see a police officer on the street or in your car. I mean, that's the just the basic security of life for a lot of people, Latino folks who live in Houston. So that quote was terrible, but there's a new quote from Mayor Whitmire during the course of this vote that went down yesterday at the Houston City Council. He said, and I can imagine him saying this, he said, he snuck up to the mic and he said, "Austin is listening. Austin is watching."
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm like, what? This is coming out of the mouth exactly, Haley. Haley's got the snidely whiplash thing going on. That what I could see a Republican mayor saying this. I could see someone who is supposed to be part of the MAGA fear machine talking this way. This guy is a Democrat. This guy's an elected Democratic mayor who, you know, by the way, is up there. You know, Houston's the fourth biggest city in the country, third by some estimates. You know, that guy is talking like Greg Abbott has him on a leash. It's shameful.
There were some city council members, I think, who were standing by their principles, but it's unfortunate to hear that the city council voted on behalf of the governor, because apparently that's the only legal opinion that matters.
Yeah, that's a really great point. This goes against like Supreme Court decision, Rodriguez v. United States. Also, you know, what's sitting right there is the Fourth Amendment. But when Governor Abbott demands something, I guess John Whitmire is happy to get in line and put forward an ordinance that placates his demands.
You know what? And really, when if we want to get into the weeds of, you know, the legality and the constitutionality of all this, the Fourth Amendment basically states that a police officer cannot detain you for any longer than he is justified in doing so based on the reason that he pulled you over.
Yeah.
There can't be a delay based on some other thing or whatever, you know, especially if you've not committed a crime, if there's not a, you know, criminal warrant against you or anything like that, which is an important distinction. The warrants that the ICE guys carry around are administrative warrants, which is very, very different from a criminal warrant. The nuts and bolts of this is that no matter what this local ordinance says, it essentially was designed to bolster the Fourth Amendment, to remind Houston police officers that they cannot sit there and have somebody, you know, sit in their car on the side of the road waiting for ICE to show up if they don't have a good reason to do that. And that still is the case, by the way. The Fourth Amendment is not beholden to some local Houston city ordinance. You know, that is constitutional federal law. That is a federal right. That every single one of us all have, is not to be detained in such a way. The problem is every single police officer in Houston, especially those who would like to help ICE, if it's, you know, within their own personal viewpoint that they want to be involved in this, they see the repealing of this ordinance. They see the caving of Democratic Mayor John Whitmire under threat from Republicans Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton. They see this as a justification to do exactly that, to trample upon that right, or they certainly could. I won't speak for police officers at all. In fact, I would hope and trust that they would do their jobs properly. But there are going to be some out there that will see this as a justification to go ahead and cooperate with ICE in a way that they personally would prefer to do. You know, the Constitution be damned. And that honestly puts the city of Houston in kind of a lurch here, I would say. The first time that this happens to a person, a subject, a detainee who is willing to fight back and has the wherewithal and the opportunity to fight back, this is going to be a constitutional lawsuit against the city of Houston for violating someone's civil rights. It's eventually going to happen. So that really, in a way, the city of Houston has put, you know, they're going to get their funding from the governor, but they've put themselves in pretty serious jeopardy, I would say.
I think that's definitely true in the case that there are defenders of the Constitution that we can depend on, like the Texas Civil Rights Project and the ACLU of Texas. And at the same time, I think that realistically, some of the people that are going to be, the majority of people who will be targeted by this, by the removal of this policy, are people who are not going to have the resources to defend themselves, which is why this was put forward in the first place, right? Like if it's the law, then you're protecting more people, is the train of thought, right? Unfortunately.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a quote from a community navigator, Norma Gonzalez. This is not normal, and our community can feel it. We are afraid to live, to drive, and to call for help. Yeah, you're right. It's exactly the people who are most affected by this who can't reach out for help and who do need those resources. So like you said, Chris, this will be fought out in the courts. So there's plenty more to come.
And I'll just give some creed to Norma, who works with Wuri Juntos. She's a really established advocate in the city of Houston. Wuri Juntos also does voter registration. So I think that they're at the forefront of a lot of the battles here down in Houston. And you can trust what she's saying there, because I think you know where this is going to lead, right?
So there we have Abbott and Paxton. At this point, successfully, they've taken another chunk out of the Fourth Amendment. They've chipped away at it, as it were. And so let's segue over to this other story that we're talking about, which is the fact that recently the notoriously conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is headquartered in New Orleans, known for all manner of MAGA-friendly rulings over there. So in a way, this is not a big surprise, but actually a very, very close vote. A divided Fifth Circuit, 9-8, has ruled in favor of Texas being able to force our public school classrooms to display the Ten Commandments in their classrooms in front of all the kids. Give us the ups and downs of that, Kathleen, if you would, as we get started talking about it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of ups and downs on this legal roller coaster. Last May 2025, this was passed as Senate Bill 10 in the regular session of the Texas legislature. Governor Greg Abbott signed it into law. And of course, you have to wonder, what wasn't the Texas legislature working on? Now in 2026, we're seeing the effects of water shortages around the state, but to put that back aside, Governor Greg Abbott signed it into law. Our public schools are not Sunday school classrooms. So multiple families sued. And in August, there was a ruling by a federal court judge saying that's put on hold. Then there's another case in December. Then in December of 25, multiple Texas families filed a class action lawsuit. And we know, Progress Texas knows one of the plaintiffs, and one of those parents is actually a Baptist minister, but she does not trust the Texas government to be instructing her child about religion. She wants to teach that at home.
Right.
And while this has gone back and forth, there was a Ten Commandments poster that I saw in my son's by the water fountain where my son practices football. And I'm filling up a water bottle for my daughter who's along with me. And I'm thinking, who is this for? Like, one of his buddies' last name on the team is Ramadan. Mm-hmm. It's not for him.
Yeah.
It's not for me filling up my water bottle for my daughter. Whose version of Christianity is this for, and why? So come to back where we are now, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, like Chris is saying, which is, you could accurately say, is like the Trumpiest court.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Trump has appointed 6 of those judges in the 17-person court. And it is remarkable that it came down to a 9-8 ruling. But unfortunately, it's the ruling the wrong way,
right?
Saying that this can go forward. And I saw the statement from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton calling the ruling, quote, a major victory for Texas and our moral values.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear Ken Paxton talking about his moral values in relation to my moral values, because they're not the same.
The irony is thick. The irony is thick in that particular, and the thing is, that's a statement from someone who assumes that his audience is completely ignorant of even recent, track record or history of what he's been up to. So yeah, shameful.
So just to go a little bit further, this ruling will be appealed by the plaintiffs because they have standing, and it truly is not the government's role to be educating my children in public school about religion or a preferred religion. Yeah. And we're talking about the Fourth Amendment. Of course, this is a First Amendment case, but I don't want my daughter's school or my son's school to be giving my children religious education that belongs in the home.
I mean, I think of, what's her name? The most hated woman in America, Madeline O'Hare, Murray O'Hare, the one who, not a lot of people liked her. But her fight was right, which was leading this separation of church and state in our public school systems. And that was back in the 60s. And here we are again, even though it's embedded in our Constitution that this is not allowed.
One of my roommates, he's starting a student teaching. He's going to become a teacher, and this law is just passed. And he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do when I have my own classroom and I have to follow my own rules. And I'm reading this article from the New York Times about this, and one of the teachers puts other religious doctrines in her classroom, which I think is a good kind of workaround to be more inclusive.
That's exactly where I was going to go. And I saw that same article, Haley, and I'm actually inspired by that. There is an opportunity for intuitive and industrious teachers in Texas to use this as a teaching moment and to go and find the religious, foundational documents of other major world religions and put them up there on the wall right next to the Ten Commandments. In which case, you're going to see there's a lot in common between those different religions. There's a lot of things that are just basic stuff, which is fine. The issue is that wasn't covered by the lawmakers who put this law together, that they just chose the Christian doctrine to put out there. And, they will argue if and I think that the question was asked a little earlier in this conversation as to why this is happening. Well, it's happening because there is a push underway to establish the idea that the United States is an inherently Christian nation, which is in complete opposition to our actual history. It is just simply not the case at all. And so, yeah, Haley, when I saw that, I was like, yeah, that's the way to approach this, is to say, yes, here's this religion that we have to show you. Here are these other 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And here's what they have to say, and let's compare and let's contrast and let's learn about the different religious cultures that exist around the world. I think that's a great opportunity for sure.
I think that would be a great fix, and I also think that if that happened by the next legislative session, we would see another bill saying that's too DEI. We're not gonna be allowed, because we've seen the same thing. Like teachers in my homeschool system of NEISD, Northeast Independent School District in San Antonio, had to take down posters of people holding hands because it was depicting people of multiple races holding hands. So
yeah,
I can see where that goes.
Can't have that.
And back in my day, we just had the U.S. Constitution on the walls. So I think that it could be a little bit simple, less decor for the teachers to have to put up in the first place and supplement out of their own pocket, with the exception of the Ten Commandments posters.
I think that's a great idea. Becca, my daughter just finished part of her social studies, some lessons about the founding documents and what's the First Amendment and what's the Bill of Rights and the phrase "we the people." Where do we find that? And we talked about what does it mean to have a freedom of religion, and what does it mean to have our First Amendment freedom of speech. And I wonder if the people who write these laws have actually read the U.S. Constitution. Right. My bestie in college gifted me one year for my birthday a pocket Constitution. I still have it. Thank you, Lashika. Okay. I think that they don't read the Constitution, just like I think that Donald Trump doesn't read the Bible, has never read the Bible, holds it upside down outside a church and says his favorite book of the Bible is 2 Corinthians. Or like Pete Hegseth, giving a prayer that's like
out of Pulp Fiction,
Quentin Tarantino's version of the New Testament or Old Testament. I mean,
insane.
It doesn't exist because they don't know what they're talking about.
I will admit that I didn't know that was a bogus Bible verse. I always assumed that it was an actual Bible verse. And so I would have been fooled too, but luckily I didn't try to
But
quote.
You've seen Pulp Fiction. You thought Jules is quoting the Bible?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, I think he gave a chapter and verse and everything. And so I just figured it was probably
not what it says
accurate.
in Ezekiel. Go look it up.
Yeah, well, I'd never bothered to look it up, and I never tried to quote it, especially not in a government, procedure or whatever. So I do want to kind of game this out. So we've talked about 2 things. We've talked about the ICE situation, the ICE ordinance in Houston, and how the state government under Republican control is trying to undermine basically the 4th Amendment by forcing through the ability to violate it on the streets of Houston. We've talked about this religious thing, this 10 Commandments thing, which is clearly a First Amendment erosion, if you will. And by the way, that's also part of a broader, effort under a combination of our state government and our federal government. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is part of what's called the Religious Liberty Commission, which is a group of him and a whole bunch of, Dr. Phil is on this group, and what's her name? Jonathan Cain from Journey's wife, the personal pastor of Donald Trump, a crazy blonde lady who Paula somebody. Anyway, her name escapes me, and Kathleen's going to Google it real quick. But those people are on that commission, so they apparently are preparing recommendations for the president as to what he should do, probably by some crazy executive order, to protect Christianity, which is clearly under attack and in danger of being eradicated, even though all this stuff is going on. What happens, guys, as we move through this election season? Let's think about November. Mm-hmm. Let's think about what people who are concerned about all these things that we're talking about, whether it's your civil liberties on the street or whether it's your freedom of or from religion, both of which are kind of under assault. In the upcoming election this November, the midterm election, I want to start with Kathleen here on this. Let's talk first about the state level and what happens for people who choose to go out and vote in sufficient numbers to make a change, in particular in statewide races that are going on right now. What changes immediately in November and what's left to continue to work on beyond November? Best case scenario.
Yeah, it really depends on what kind of numbers show up. This is the midterm election after the first Trump years was 2018, of course. And Beto O'Rourke and Democrats and progressives across the state turned out votes up and down the ticket. Of course, that was the last year of straight ticket voting, right. by design, because that's too much democracy. So 12 state reps knocked out 12 Republicans. 2 state senators won elections on the Democratic side. I think we're going to see more than that this year. And we're not so far away from a majority. And it depends on the people. Will there be a super majority? Will there be a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, people who can both by the stroke of a pen signing legislation or by executive order, or also threats as right. Governor Abbott governs. But after 2018, so in that next legislative session was probably one of the best in decades, before the time when, of course, Democrats ran Texas, because the Republicans and the far right moderated.
Right.
They rolled back the far right, pushing public education off a cliff. There was so much progress made because people didn't want to lose their seats. And they saw that instead of, like what we were talking about earlier, Governor Abbott is watching me, the people were watching. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it should be.
Right.
People who are elected should be concerned about being watched and being afraid of the people, not of someone 100 miles away or somebody across the country in Washington, D.C.
So let's go from there to the federal level. So, in play right now is the Senate. The marquee race is the Senate race between James Tallarico on the Democratic side and either Ken Paxton or Senator John Cornyn on the Republican side. Of course, soon to be decided that little bit with the runoff coming up in late May. Tatum, let's say, a field day for the Democrats. The Democrats take both the House and the Senate. Let's, keeping in mind the current state of the executive branch, keeping in mind the current state of the judicial branch, what's the path forward from there if the best case scenario turns out for the Democrats at the federal level?
If Tallarico is elected, things are, for one thing, that is a warning sign to the nation that far right politics are not winning in even the most red of states, right? So that means that there's a change among the public here in America. What that means for everybody else, I don't know. The House of Reps is within the margin of victory for a big midterm blue wave, right? So I don't know about the Senate. I think that it's definitely feasible to see, especially with so many people stepping down recently because of sexual assault allegations. Mm-hmm. It's a small margin that could be overtaken. So where that puts us is something that reminds me, Barack Obama, George Bush, and I think Bill Clinton were all interviewed by Jenna Bush Hager earlier this week. The 250th anniversary of the U.S. is taking place this year. And I think the question here is, where does democracy stand, right? And George Bush said something in that interview. He said, democracy is self-protecting. I think I disagree. I think that, sure, in theory, in a vacuum, it could be. but there are a lot of people that are holding it up right now and with a ton of attacks trying to break away at the foundation. And so during this 250th year, I think that we could see a huge victory in 2026, but there's so many other ranging from minuscule to huge barriers to really cementing democracy for years to come. Right. We know that so many of the policies put forward, but in Project 2025 are going to need to be dismantled. And some of that will be possible if we have Democratic leadership in the House of Reps and the Senate, in Congress overall, right? Like there are legislative victories to be made and rollbacks to be had, but a lot of it does come down to the executive branch. So 28 and 29, we shall see.
I see an impeachment in the president's future.
Sure.
I see Democrats winning in either, hopefully, Texas, Maine, and Alaska. Democrats have a real shot because Republicans who do not like the direction that this country is going, who are promised cheaper groceries, who were promised no new wars, were sold a bill of goods, and they know that they've been deceived and want something else.
Let's make Congress useful again. War powers and impeachment and the real concrete, massive things that Congress was supposed to have the responsibility to uphold. And Tatum, you're right. I don't think democracy is self-protecting. I think we all have a responsibility, especially our elected representatives, to safeguard democracy. And if we have people in office who actually care about representing the people that voted for them or didn't vote for them, the people that are the people that pay taxes, the people that are supposed to be getting something in return are not getting anything in return because people do not want to stand up to the powers that be. And I think if we have people in office that do, we'll see a lot of big changes here. And I'm excited.
I regret to report that make Congress useful again spells out Makua, which
we can make that work.
I don't think that's going to work, but I do like the sentiment behind that for sure.
Yeah.
I like to think of it in very boiled down terms. You know, if the Democrats ended up in control of both the House and the Senate, that does a couple of things. First of all, it's a full-on check on the executive branch. That's where impeachments no longer become theater. Impeachments become things that actually happen, that people are actually removed from office, and those things actually have teeth at that point. And even further from that, in terms of what happens to the judicial branch at that point, there is definitely a chilling effect on their crazier impulses, I would say, once, the will of the people has been very well elucidated by that point, by that election result.
Expand the Supreme Court.
Yes, there's also those sorts of options. And there's also a stoppage on, Donald Trump's rubber stamp on being able to appoint new judges to the Supreme Court. And so there are so many things, so many reasons that Democrats who are looking for a change have to vote their asses off and have to drag everybody they know to vote. It's always said every single time, this is the most important election of our lives. Back to what Tatum said about, George W. Bush's comments about, democracy having some kind of automatic self-correcting sort of thing. Our democracy, as we've talked about this entire talk, is very much under direct attack from people who are looking to undermine the foundation of our democracy in our country, which is our Constitution. So, guys, terrific talk. We really, really appreciate it. Once again, for In Progress, thanks so much to Tatum Owens and to Haley Smith and to Kathleen Thompson. Progress Texas amplifies progressive values, leaders, and actions. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. Radio listeners, if you missed any of our show today, you're in luck. Because it will air again this weekend on KPFT Radio in Houston, 90.1 FM HD2. That happens the second run every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. More information on KPFT can be found clearly at kpft.org, and more information on Progress Texas can be found at progresstexas.org.